On the line, we will get this party started. And I want to thank Lawrence, first of all, because it's the end of a really long day for him. And also, he was recently unwell, but recovered, recovering. So we got him, and we're so thankful. So welcome, Lawrence.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian. Yeah, I'm feeling a lot better. Yep, just the good old COVID got me finally after 2.5 years. So
that's your first time having COVID, huh?
Okay, yeah, surprising since I work in the emergency department. So
yeah.
But
well, that's a good record, Lawrence. I'm sure you do the right things to take care of your immunity. Right, so we started late, I know, but I want to keep it on time as well. So we'll go for 45 minutes and we'll make that hard. So I might have to I got a list of questions. I might have to kind of skip around. We'll make it partly conversational as well. And I just want to introduce Lawrence real quick before we start. And that is starting off saying that Lawrence is a dear friend and a colleague, and I've known him for 3 decades. And I did have something I wanted to show you. Let me see if I can do a quick screen share. Nancy, can you do me a screen share? Actually, you know what? I'll just show you something real quick on my Instagram, make it easier. And that is that many of us in the yoga world, a lot of us are yogis, and we diss on the medical system and say, oh God, the doctors only deal with the Band-Aid solutions and not get to the root of the problems. And I think that in the medical world, there's a lot of people who used to consider meditation and breathing techniques and yoga woo-woo. And so there's a little Venn diagram that I've got. Let's see if it can show up for you. Yeah, so basically this is what I feel like the paradigm was like in around 1990, where this is yoga on this side and medicine on the other side. And then I feel it's a really exciting time here with yoga and medicine, and there's this nice Venn diagram where it intersects. And that is, I feel like, where our current model is. And so having said that, I feel like Lawrence is really at the forefront of this beautiful synthesis, let's call it, of, we can call it Eastern wisdom, but we can call it holistic health, not just dealing with root problems first and foremost, and then trying to deal with medical intervention as a last resort mostly. And I just want to say that Lawrence is very dedicated to his profession. He was an emergency doctor, and when we would talk at our Yoga Mind Body Medicine courses, he would talk about how that's like the sink, like basically it's the end of the medical system when people are getting flushed down the sink or the toilet even. And he really wanted to have the drain, right? And so he wanted to try and work more upstream as possible. And that's when he started his Connect Health. And it's a beautiful vision in Vancouver where he does his holistic healing. So thank you, Lawrence, for joining us and for your commitment to really true healing.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian. Well, it's a privilege as always to co-teach with you. So I learned so much from you equally. But yeah, it's been a journey for sure. And for me, like my perspective is, I've been trained as an emergency physician. I still work in the ER. So that's still my half-time gig. But yeah, I realized for a long time that we have to address the root issues of problems, and we have to look at things from an integrative systems perspective, right? So Western medicine, although it's great for acute care and really catastrophic things, it's not very good at looking at all the connections between all the systems. And so for me, that was a journey of learning more about integrative medicine, then functional medicine, precision medicine, just asking the question, like, how do we understand what's actually happening with the body more? And how do we help address the root issues and not just treat symptoms, right? So that's really been my journey. So
yeah, and we honor you for it, and doctors like you who are stepping into that forefront. Incidentally, just on that note, and back to that Venn diagram that you saw where there's this intersection of yoga and science or medicine, Western science and medicine, is that we originally set up the yoga mind body medicine course as part of our 500-hour training for yoga instructors, but we soon found that after not much time, it was about 30% nurses and doctors who actually were looking for that more holistic component that's not taught a lot in medical school, but they see the research out there changing. So again, thanks to Lawrence, and again, all doctors who are kind of open to all possibilities. So let's use that as a leverage point. What Lawrence was saying was, the first question is about, I want to tell you actually two things. We're going to start with the takeaways. Okay, so Lawrence and I had a conversation about 3 weeks ago about like, oh, hormones is such a big issue. Like, where do we go with it? And really Lawrence's point that he wanted to make, and something we feel strongly about, is, and just in case you didn't know the name of the webinar, it's called Yoga, Hormones, and You. Okay, so we're going to drill down into hormones. So hormones is a big topic. Endocrine system is a big topic. Nervous system is a huge topic. But takeaway number one is that, as Lawrence was just saying, that you really need to look at things, hormones, at a systemic level and not just one, right? Hormone, you can up your levels. You know, if I run low on oil in my car and my oil light goes on, I just add a quart of oil and that's it. But it's not as simple as like, oh, I'll take 300 milligrams of testosterone and for X number of weeks, and just replacing that will automatically like fill myself up like I do with oil in my car. So that's point number one. Point number two is, again, being people who are interested in yoga, meditation, and breathing techniques. We just want to leave you with tools and research and actionable items that you can do, linking all of these ideas of how to balance your hormones a little bit. It's a big topic. We can't obviously go super deep into this, but we do want to just give you an overview about how you can use the yogic toolbox, so to speak, in order to balance your hormone system. So that's the takeaway. But let's start, like, go way back. So that's where we're going to end up. We're dropping a pin. But let's go way back, and I thought we could start at the beginning. And for me, having studied hormones with Lawrence, and actually I did physiology courses over the pandemic, and I really feel like it's important to start with homeostasis to really understand any of these body systems. So I'm going to turn it over to Lawrence. And can you give me your 2-minute definition of homeostasis, Lawrence, and why it's important?
Sure. Okay, homeostasis. So really, it's not entirely correct, the whole term homeostasis, because it implies this kind of static equilibrium, but it's really dynamic, right? So it's about an equilibrium. So just think about it. Every cell in your body, right, wants to maintain equilibrium. It wants to be in a homeostatic balance, right? So if something throws that cell off, it can be anything, you know, some chemical, some heat, or something disturbs its balance, then the cell is going to try to go back to that place of balance, right? To kind of reestablish this equilibrium. So yeah, there's not really a one static like homeostasis. It's continually dynamic, right?
Yeah.
And that's the other big concept about hormones and biology systems in general, is that it's constantly fluctuating. It's not static, right? And the body's continually having to sense what's happening in the environment. And that means, like, within the body, between cells, between tissues, between organ systems, and your body and the outside environment, that's constantly responding to signals, right? It's a sensing part of it. And then the body needs to appropriately respond, right? And it's always adjusting, like, okay, what is the signal? How much do I need to adjust and how much do I need to respond, right? Sensing and response.
I love it. Hearing that, I mean, as a yogi, it really makes me think about doing a handstand or a balancing pose on one foot. You think of it like, oh, just stand there like a pencil, but actually in a real human system, it's way more dynamic than we like to model out. Yeah, and so homeostasis is the same thing. We kind of came up with this static. The word stasis makes us think about static, but it's really dynamic. Yeah, I love that. And then as far as hormones go, can you explain for us what the difference is between, or just what's your definition of a hormone in general, Lawrence? Just to go back to that basic kind of high school biology level.
Sure, yeah, it's good to review. Hormones, they're basically chemical messengers, right? So it's a molecular shape, or it's a biochemical that the body makes, or you can get, obviously hormones from outside, or exogenous hormones. And these hormones, they interact with cells and tissues in the body. It's as simple as that. It's a chemical messenger, right? But they're extremely complex, right? They can do very, very complex things. So they're extremely powerful chemical messengers. Actually, you know what? I'm going to see if I can share screen. Can you allow screen sharing, Ian?
Can I allow screen sharing? Why don't I ask Jen to do that? She's co-hosting, or can you do it too?
Unless you might be able to make me a co-host.
Yeah, I can make you a co-host. Do that.
Maybe make me a co-host and I can share.
There you go. Yeah.
Because the other thing, Ian and I talk a lot about is that these things are like really conceptual. Let's see if this works here. Okay. But I want people to try to actually visualize it, and if anything, have more of a feeling sense of it, right? So let me just show you a picture of a hormone. This is a hormone, right? This is it's like a three-dimensional diagram of it. And it's a complex, you can see, three-dimensional shape of proteins, right? So this shape or conformation contains information, right? And this is the estrogen receptor, right? Again, this is just like a cartoon diagram, but this is a three-dimensional, very complex shapes that are on our cell surfaces, like receptors or antennas. And then these hormones are these ribbon-like proteins, again, three-dimensional shapes that dock onto these receptors, right? So so they're messengers, right? They contain information.
Yeah, and it's actually great. Thanks for sharing those slides, because it really gives us a image that we can keep in our mind. And so I think that's a good refresher on what hormones are, what they look like. And next question would be, one way that I've heard, I really like this description of how to think about the nervous system versus the endocrine system, is that the nervous system is more like Gmail, where if I send you direct information, it's fast, it'll go right to your inbox, whereas the hormone system is more like Twitter. So I'll send a tweet out and maybe people pick it up, maybe it don't. It's much slower delivery. It's not as precise getting to its target all the time. But would you say that's a fair assessment? And basically, what's your take on the difference, between the endocrine system and the nervous system? And second part of the question is, how are they related? And I know you have the HPTAG Axis slide too.
Yeah, great question, Ian. So in some ways, right, like we talk about these systems as different systems, like the endocrine system, right? So all the glands that release these hormones. And we talk about the nervous system as a separate system, and they are in some ways, but in other ways they're not, right? It's all about communication between the brain and tissues and cells, and between cells and cells, tissues and tissues, right? It's communication network, right? So
Lawrence, sorry to interrupt, but do you still want your screen up there, or?
Yeah, I can unshare there. Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
And so the nervous system in general, it's wires. It's wires and cables, right? So you got the central nervous system, then you've got the spinal cord, and then this connects to all these wires, right? So so typically the nervous system is very quick, right? A signal goes down from the brain stem into spinal cord and the wires. So that's one way that the brain, the nervous system communicates with the body. And hormones, they are a little bit slower, right? But they go into the bloodstream and then they flood literally every cell in the body with these messages, right?
Right.
Yeah, they're both
Beautiful.
communication networks, right?
Yeah.
Communication systems.
Yeah, and I want to ask that question just again because the takeaway is that nothing's as simple as just replacing one hormone. Like I mean, so you can see right away that there's a nervous system and an endocrine system. They work together as a unit, but but you know, there's many. It's not as complicated as just one hormone doing things. And tied in with that, can you explain, Lawrence, for us? I think it would be also on that similar note of understanding the complexity of hormones to understand a hormone cascade.
Sure. Actually, I'll share that HPA or HPTAG axis picture.
Sure.
So let's share that here. So, okay, so yeah, and this is one of the big points here, is the hormones should never be talked about in isolation, really, right? Because it's this
Underline
whole
that. That make sure everyone
axis.
highlights that. That's a real big. That's a real big takeaway. I think I mentioned it 3 times already. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a big takeaway because a lot of times we kind of treat hormone imbalances separately, and you imbalance one or you try to correct one, and then the other one gets imbalanced, right? So this is what this diagram's trying to look at. And there's a lot of different terms here, but one of them is, the simplest one is HPA axis, which is hypothalamic. It's in the brain. It's a sensor, right? It's a sensing what's happening in the body. Pituitary is the gland that, it's like the master gland. It releases a lot of glands. And then, you know, sometimes it's shortened to be A, which is the adrenal axis, but actually it contains the thyroid and the adrenals. And there's actually a lot of hormones in the gut. There's actually also a lot of hormones in the gut, and the gonadal axis, or the sex hormones, right? So this diagram is showing, and you can see these kind of circular arrows going bi-directionally, is that they're all communicating, you know, between each other and with the brain, right? So they're all connected. So yes, if one thing goes off, the other ones can go off as well. So it's really it's a whole balancing act. And that's what we mean by cascade. So certain things, if the thyroid goes off, it can actually cause the adrenals to have to overcompensate, and vice versa, right? So they're all connected and they all have effects on each other.
That's beautiful. That's great. Just a side note on that. I mean, I think everyone got the idea that yeah, there's cascades, that all these hormones are affecting each other. And again, the main takeaway: you can't just look at one hormone in isolation. As you said, if one level goes up, it can affect another hormone either positively or negatively. But I also just want to pause for a second and really have a look at that diagram and state the obvious that will probably pop out in most yoga yogis and yoginis' minds, and that is that this is almost an exact model of the chakra system, right? And I just, you know, we'll get into that deeper in the course, and it kind of gets a little bit beyond our scope of where we wanted to go to today. But I think it's really important, and Lawrence's point of showing you this was to let you feel things more, and our goal is to give you tools so you can feel this more. Every day, by the way, when I do meditation, this is what I'm doing, is actually trying to feel into these systems and try and minimize my stress response and maximize my relaxation response, and just feel where I'm out of balance. And even though the yogis, the cool thing is that even though the yogis didn't really care too much about their chemical messengers of hormones and they're more into energy, it's amazing how just by getting into the feeling, they completely mapped almost exactly these amazing centers of chemical messengers. But we'll press pause on that idea. I just wanted to really do a hats off to the yogis and yoginis for the past for coming up with that model. It's beautiful. Okay, so we got into the HPA axis there. So again, the hypothalamic pituitary axis. So there's signals that go from basically behind your nose down into the adrenals to the thyroid that Lawrence is talking about. So hopefully everyone got that point. I want to ask you another question then, Lawrence. Maybe you can just end your screen share too. Is that how can people know? We'll start off subjectively, and then part two of the question can be objectively. How can people know if their hormones are out of balance? I think, we talk about people being hormonal, but what's your kind of go-to? Let's say someone comes into your office and I know that, okay, we talked about how many different hormones there are, but let's say even their stress hormones, how do they know? What kind of questions will you ask them? Subjective,
Yeah,
how you can know.
subjective. Yeah, because the hormones have so many functions, the range of hormonal imbalances is huge, right? So I'll just tackle some bigger groups. So when we really think about hormones clinically, or at least the way I think it should be thought, is you always first need to think about the two main hormones, which drive a lot of our physiology. And that's
Mm-hmm.
actually our regulation of stress, right? So
Mm-hmm.
cortisol hormone, and actually the regulation of energy and metabolism, and that's insulin.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so we actually don't we often leave insulin out, like, as we always think about estrogen and progesterone and thyroid, but we don't really think about insulin. But insulin is actually a very, very powerful hormone. And when our insulin systems are off and we start getting type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance, it throws all the other hormones off, right? So typical one for women, polycystic ovarian syndrome, right, where women can get like facial hair and weight gain and irregular menstrual periods. The primary problem is actually insulin resistance. It's actually insulin resistance.
Mm-hmm.
So the treatment there is not to fiddle with the sex hormones. It's actually to improve diet, exercise, lose weight, and improve insulin sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So yeah, so weight gain issues, for women, facial hair, for men, loss of muscle mass, erectile dysfunction, diabetes, fatigue. I mean, all these things can basically point towards hormone imbalances, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're very wide. Thyroid stuff would be, if it's underactive thyroid, people have weight gain, hair loss, dry skin, right? Can't lose weight,
Mm-hmm.
feel cold all the time. And then um, an overactive thyroid is opposite, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
can't gain weight. You're basically feeling hot all the time. You have heart palpitations. You have anxiety,
Hyperthyroid.
hyperthyroidism, right? So that's
Yeah.
why hormonal manifestations, like, they're all across the board, right? But
Mm-hmm.
subjectively, it's if there's enough imbalances, you'll have these significant symptoms, right?
Well, that's really, I mean, there's so many interests, just tons you brought up there. But it's one thing that really stopped me for a second is like when you said, "Oh, the two most important hormones." I was like, I was all ears for that one. I find that's really interesting. The cortisol and insulin. I mean, as soon as you said that, my immediate thought was, "Oh, glucose, like energy."
Mm-hmm.
And then you talked about diet and stress response, and everything. So I mean, diet's a huge topic, and I think if we go there, we're going to end up going a little bit over time. But just to deal with it in general, my simple question is, I'm, do you actually specifically talk to people about sugar?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because again, there's way too much sugar in our diet, and there's, I mean, insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, it's epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just too much refined carbohydrates and sugars. And
Mm-hmm.
that really throws people's whole insulin sensitivity off.
Yeah.
And that is a big driver for all kinds of hormonal imbalances,
Right.
right? So again, it's the same thing, right? It's like um, people want to rush to kind of correct the hormones, but the primary problem maybe for some people is that their whole sugar metabolism is all off. And so the
Mm-hmm.
first thing you want to address is that you want to balance out your sugars. You want to exercise, you want to have a low carb diet, you want to reduce stress, you want to bring your sugar levels down and increase your insulin sensitivity. And a lot of times, and in the case with polycystic ovarian syndrome, a lot of times women's secondary hormone imbalances improve, right?
Yeah.
So again, it's addressing the root issue of the problem, not just trying to tweak the hormones, right?
Can we just take a shift from that, from the polycystic ovarian syndrome to kids? Because I mean, again, I just want to deal with this for a second because the big issue for Intia's sitting beside me, so I'm just pointing to her. I mean, we just see so many kids and the amount of sugar they eat and how acceptable that is. And then we have something called ADHD. And I know it's a barbed wire topic a little bit for some people, but how do you, because we talked about regulating the sugar, the glucose, how do you see that ADHD in relation to the cortisol and insulin system? Or is that just not something you think about that much?
Yeah, I mean, it's all connected. I mean, it's interesting, the whole ADHD thing. And the question is, what exactly is ADHD, right? And we still
Yes.
don't exactly know. And it's
Yeah.
probably multiple factors, right? So it could be, you know, a brain disorder where there's some developmental brain stuff that's going on. It could be a brain connectivity issue. It could be a brain biochemistry issue. Could be all those things, but there's no question, as in everything, like metabolism is going to be a big driver, right? So
Yeah.
sugar is inflammatory, sugar is neuroexcitatory. So if you have some kind of predisposition to ADHD, then it's going to make it worse, right? So
Yeah.
sure, bad sugar regulation is neuroexcitatory, right? And inflammation is neuroexcitatory. So bad diets, inflammatory foods are all going to make it worse, right?
So let's just dwell on this for one more second. Do you see this in your clinic? Do you actually deal with a lot of kids that come in, or is it mostly adults that?
Yeah, we don't deal with so much kids per se, but I mean, tons of adults. I mean, the biggest thing now is ADHD in adults. So it's like
Yeah.
massive cascade in that. So it's the same thing. And I think, again, it's so easy to become reductionist and then put people on amphetamines to treat the ADHD, but it's like, it's the same thing. Like, what are the drivers there? And certainly from an integrative and functional perspective, like, what are people eating? What are you putting in your body? How is your body metabolism? What is, the sleep? What is the stress systems? All that stuff, right? Those really need to be addressed, right? And not just treating it with a medication, right?
And how would you say we're doing as a, not in your clinic, but in our culture to ask those
Oh, well,
questions? Like, give us a grade, A, B, C, D, E, F. I don't know.
I
Generally
mean,
speaking.
unfortunately, it's not great because it's a
Yeah.
lot easier to write a prescription than to go through all this stuff. And a lot of people, they still want to just take a pill, right?
Yeah.
It's, now, just to be fair, like, some people truly have ADHD, which is
Of course.
a
Of
brain
course.
biochemistry issue, and they are hugely helped by these medications. But I do think there's a lot of people who are being overdiagnosed with ADHD, and they would probably be best dealt with lifestyle,
Yeah. Yeah, actually, it's interesting. We just had someone in our training, Preston, who speaks openly about this, and he was diagnosed with ADHD, and he just felt horrible after his medication. And he's still fairly young. I'm not sure how old is Preston, 25? Anyway, and he discovered just literally surfing and yoga, and just gave him honestly, you got to hear a story, and just that focus and doing exercise, and just like he just couldn't stand with how badly the drugs made him feel. And he actually filmed our last training here in Bali, and he is such an intelligent, not scattered, completely focused individual. It's amazing. So let's bring it back. And I want to ask you about let's go objective. Okay, so we talked about subjectively. I think we kind of touched upon objectively, but how can we know objectively if our hormones are out of balance?
Yeah, objective meaning basically laboratory testing mostly. It's complicated. You can measure hormones. I mean, you can measure testosterone, you can measure estrogen, you can measure progesterone, you can measure some of the thyroid hormones, you can measure cortisol. So you can measure a lot of these things. The difficulty is they change all the time, right? They change like testosterone.
Day to day, or hour to
Well, they
hour.
change hour to hour.
Yeah.
And they change from day to day,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you can do blood tests, but you have to be very careful in interpreting them, because you could have an off day and your hormone levels are low, but the next day it's going to be fine.
Or you
For
just got a
women,
call from something, you know, like,
yeah, cortisol
but 20
literally
minutes later, you've worked it
changes.
out. Yeah.
Cortisol changes like literally like minute to minute,
Yeah.
right? So they're very, very variable, and they have, the body's got its own natural rhythms. You know, for example, testosterone will peak in the morning, which is the best time to measure it, but then it starts dropping throughout the day. And for women,
Ideally.
yeah, ideally, for
Yeah.
women, the female hormones are changing through the cycle, and I mean, it's, yeah. So you can get blood measurements for hormones, but they are tricky to interpret. If they're really off, you know, certain things for thyroid and adrenals and sex hormones, it's relatively easy to make a diagnosis. But there's a huge area where there's imbalances, but they don't really meet diagnostic criteria. I see that all the time, where people are like, you know, I have all the symptoms of adrenal fatigue and everything, but the cortisol level is actually within normal range. So what does that mean? Right? So it could still mean that you have problems with the adrenals, but it's just not severe enough to show up on the blood tests, right? So,
Or it could be interpretation, right? I mean, some people, you know, you drink half a cup of coffee and it, for example, and it throws, like, the effect it has on them is massive, but they have this much they have the same amount of caffeine, but someone else drinks half a cup of coffee and they're like, no big deal. You know, it's like, so even if you objectively measure it, that's why I wanted to ask the question about subjectively as well. I feel like you kind of take both together.
you need both together. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, I love it. So, you know, hormones affect so many things. We just talked about the sugar regulations, our metabolic rate, stress, bonding. Just to really kind of zoom in on one system, again, with the idea of what kind of tools can we have, what can yoga offer us, and the other one of how to see how these hormones operate, not just in isolation, which we touched upon with this HPA axis. Can we zoom in, Lawrence, on the sex hormones?
Sure, yeah. I'm going to
So
show
like
you guys.
estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone sort of thing, and just top contour, just talk about how they interrelate.
Sure, I'm going to show you guys one slide first before this. It's related. Now, this is what disrupts hormonal imbalance, right? Again, you do have to really think very holistically about it, because there's so many factors, right? Nutritional insufficiencies, inflammation, chronic stress, increased adipose tissue, right? Obesity, food diet, right? All the chemicals in the foods, all that stuff, altered biotransformation. So this is your detoxification systems, right? That's the other thing too, which is worth mentioning, is that one of the big disruptors of hormones are chemicals. Are chemicals, you know, xenoestrogens, plastics, pesticides, all those things are very potent disruptors of endocrine function.
Right, of course.
Toxins, infections, different infections can cause problems, genetics, and sometimes food allergies, including things like gluten and celiac disease, right? So again, when you're looking at hormonal imbalances, same message, right? It's not rushing towards replacing the hormone, right? It could be thyroid hormone, it could be testosterone, it could be estrogen, progesterone. It's looking at all these issues and seeing what you can address from the root cause standpoint, right? That's really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, you can see why. I mean, how many categories do we have there? 10. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of time to look at, you know, versus like, oh, just up the level. But I mean, for a clinician to be able to look at that and go, oh my God, I think about 10 different lifestyle or environmental factors. That's a lot. I love this slide. Go ahead. This is a great one. I took a picture of it every year in your course. I always want to post it on social media. You guys send it to me afterwards, but this is just brilliant.
Yeah, this one's,
Yeah.
I got this. Yeah, this one, functional medicine conference, they always use this slide. I mean, it's a little bit oversimplified, but it's to a degree, it's quite true.
Yeah.
Men's got one switch on and off, and women's got all these dials and everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is not, to go into any detail, but the steroid pathways is extremely complex. I mean, just Google, sex steroid pathways. This is just the sex steroids. We're not talking about adrenals or thyroids or all those other things. This is simply the sex hormones. And it's very, very complicated. And they interconvert between different molecules, right? So that's where the sex hormones are quite tricky. And I think, yeah, this is the one thing you did want to talk about. And I think this is the most important point. It's something called a phenomenon called cholesterol steal, right? So the hormones are actually all made from cholesterol as the parent molecule, right? And they call it the chicken wire. It looks like chicken wire, basically. So
Or
cholesterol
sometimes
is
they call it sometimes the pregnenolone steal too, right?
yeah, pregnenolone is right here.
Yeah.
Right. So pregnenolone, yeah, it gets converted here, or cortisol steal. So both apply. So here's the thing. There's two main pathways from cholesterol to pregnenolone. It's either going to go down this pathway to make DHEA, androstenedione, testosterone, that gets converted to estrogens, a different estrogen. So it's the sex steroid pathways, okay? Or the other switch is it goes down to make these stress hormones. So cortisol, there's another one called aldosterone, right? So,
and this is women and men, right? This
yeah,
is
body,
women and
yeah,
men, right? Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, if you are under chronic stress, the system is always going to preferentially go down the stress pathway because it's survival, right? Your body will always prioritize survival over reproduction, right? So it shuts down the pathways to reproduction, which makes sense, right? If you're under chronic stress and we're talking about survival, it's not the time to be reproducing. So you need cortisol because you need to maintain survival, right? And so we see this practically with, women athletes or women who are underweight. They don't have enough sufficient body fat. Extreme athletes, women who are under extreme stress, their periods stop, right? The periods stop. And for men, likewise, and actually we're seeing an epidemic of this. Wonder whoever's dog is barking.
I know. I just told Insia to tell. That's our dog. Please. Sorry, we're in Bali and Bali dogs. Our dog's name is Dingo. I just wrote a note to Insia and said, "Go get Dingo here." Sorry, I'm so sorry. Yeah.
That's okay.
Anyway, it's good because I think the dog. I think the dog got your stress message and was just trying to give us that extra stress response. And it actually is good. I actually have never been a dog owner before this time in Bali, and now we are. And it's actually interesting because we're talking about the stress response or the relaxation response. I really just observe dogs, and they're kind of like extremely in one or extremely in the other. It's almost like no middle ground. It's like they're either like half asleep or fully asleep, especially here in Bali where it's like 90 degrees every day. Or they're chasing after the guy who just drove up the alley in a scooter. And yeah, I mean, it just makes me really think about the hormone pathways as well. Is like that's what we're trying to do, is which one are you on? And that's it, is when we switch to the stress response, your body is like you mentioned, it's not the time to make a baby. So I think it's really fascinating, this cortisol steal. Some people disagree with it. I mean, it's a little bit of a controversial topic, right, in medicine?
Well, not at the extremes, right? Like we all know women who are under a lot of stress, their periods shut off and women can't get pregnant. And for men, it's the same thing. Testosterone will be suppressed. And we see this all the time in men who are stressed out, testosterone drops. So that's really not controversial. It's to what degree it's happening. But definitely, yeah, it's quite common a lot of women are having menstrual irregularities and men are having a lot of testosterone deficiency syndrome because of chronic stress. What's driving it?
Yeah. I mean, definitely adrenal fatigue is like, I mean, it's something that I think yogis are quick to say, oh, I have adrenal fatigue. And I think subjectively we know what it's like to be burnt out, but medicine is not, modern medicine is saying, oh, there's no such thing as adrenal fatigue. Would you agree with that?
Yeah,
A lot
well,
of
I
Western,
think it's I think the way I think about it is there's definitely adrenal insufficiency, right? So there's a condition called Addison's, right? Where you don't make enough cortisol and you have low blood pressure, you're dizzy, you crave salt, you're falling down, your potassium's low, and you do the blood test and you can confirm, this Addison's disease. But that it's not that common. Some people have it to that degree. But I think the thing which doesn't make sense in conventional medicine is like you have Addison's disease, which you don't have enough adrenal hormone, and then you have Cushing's disease where you have too much, and then in between that, it's normal, right?
Yeah.
But it can't be the case because it's a spectrum disease. So there's some people who are not as bad as someone who meets the criteria for Addison's, but they might be on that path, right? So, and I think that's where conventional medicine, we don't quite appreciate some of the spectrum of it where they don't meet the diagnostic criteria, but people, it's not normal. They're just having, lesser degrees of imbalance.
Yeah,
Right?
there's basically
So,
three categories, and what I heard there is like totally on, totally off, or normal.
yeah.
It's
So
just kind of,
doesn't make
unfortunately, there's
sense.
50 shades of
Yeah,
50 shades
exactly.
of along the way. Yeah, so it's a spectrum thing. Yeah, that's beautiful. So let's get into it just to kind of close things up a bit. So I'm coming to your clinic, and I'm saying, I think my testosterone's low. I have low vitality, low libido. I lack energy. We do, we take samples, and I'm low on testosterone. I mean, it'd be easy to do TRT, and but would you to testosterone replacement therapy? But let's just go to the kind of takeaway I wanted to get to. I think everyone got that it's not just as simple as just giving me more testosterone. But let's talk about, just before we finish, how yoga, meditation, mindfulness, breathing exercises can really help to regulate. And again, we don't want to oversimplify it as well and say it's only that and just do that and that can balance, again, many things. But how can that help as a useful tool, just before we finish, Lawrence?
Yeah. So if you remember that diagram, so what are the drivers for hormonal imbalances, right? So there's so many of them, right? And it starts with, food and exercise and sleep, digestion, all that stuff, right? So that stuff is really important. But the other
one thing, Lawrence, just to take your screen share away. Sorry, I should have a facilitator for this. Yeah.
Yeah. So on top of that layer, and what's important is you do have to address all those things, right? So I think, you can do all the yoga you want, but if you're just consuming a high sugar, high carb diet, not otherwise exercising, you can do all the yoga you want. Your hormones are still going to be out of whack, right? So again, it does go back to the fundamentals of, anti-inflammatory whole food, diet, low carb, lower sugar diets, exercise, sleep. Sleep is probably worth mentioning. Like sleep is a major connector to hormones, right? And also melatonin is a hormone, right? So if you've got a disrupted sleep or circadian pattern,
up here,
it's going to throw off all your hormones, right? So again, if hormones are off, you got to look at sleep, and you got to try to get your circadian rhythms kind of matched up. So yeah, that's a huge, huge point, right? If your sleep is disrupted, your hormones are going to get disrupted, right? So all that stuff needs to be addressed. And then on top of that, chronic stress is a huge driver of hormonal imbalances, right? For insulin, for cortisol, thyroid, adrenals, sex hormones, all of it, right? Chronic stress is hugely affecting the balance there, right? So what we're understanding from yoga and the mind-body practices is that it's really good at down-regulating our stress response, right?
Yeah.
And that's either directly through shifting to parasympathetic, right, autonomic nervous system, and also dampening this kind of cortisol stress response, right? And there's lots of studies that have shown that people who do yoga, generally their baseline cortisol levels are lower, right? Not too low, like where it could be a problem, but they're more in balance, right?
Yeah, that's beautiful. So again, I think what I really heard there is yoga can be an amazing tool in mindfulness practice, but don't again, that's same way we can't oversimplify things and say it's just one hormone that is out of balance. Like there's a number of lifestyle imbalances. Lawrence mentioned diet and sleep. Oh, I just got back somehow.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Just
Yeah, you put up
showing
the
this slide
Yeah,
here. This is
got it.
another slide we use for the skill of chill, right? So, I mean, there's lots of studies are looking at yoga and the stress response, reducing the impact of the exaggerated stress response down regulates this HPTAG axis, right? So improves heart rate variability, increases pain tolerance, reduces oxidative stress, improves insulin sensitivity, decreases inflammatory markers, right? So again, insulin sensitivity, inflammation, oxidative stress, these things all drive hormonal imbalances, right? Which is why, yoga seems like a very good tool, right? To help us down-regulate the stress response and balance hormones.
Yeah. Why don't we say this too? Because the great thing about the course that we're doing and what we're trying to share here, and it's just beyond our scope of time. We're actually just kind of just slipping into extended time now, so we'll have to wrap it in a second. But I mean, one thing I'd love to land is, I guess, 2 points, and one is that there's just so much research, so much more research in the last 10 years on these types of findings that Lawrence is showing you on the slide. And it's incredible. I mean, so that's, I guess, back to where we all started with that Venn diagram of the intersection of science and yoga, that we can see, like, it's actually measurable, it's actually repeatable experience, it's actually objective data, that where we can see that this actually that yoga does do the things that you're seeing on the slide. And just back to another point, Lawrence, I mean, when you're talking about the holistic part of it, you probably know the saying, but I loved it when I heard it, and that is, we tend to want to deal with things in medicine. So again, just like a one quick fix Band-Aid. And people who don't agree with that, I wish I could attribute this quote to somebody, but they said, right lifestyle through chemistry still requires right lifestyle. You've heard that one before, right? Yeah. And when I heard that, and related to what you said about, okay, you got to look at yoga, sleep, diet, all these other things, your connection to nature, like there's a whole spectrum. And sometimes I think that right lifestyle through yoga still requires right lifestyle, right? You can't just use yoga as a medicine to fix you. You can, it'll do great things, but if you're not looking at your attitude, your belief systems, all these other things as well, then it's never going to have the same impact. And that's really, our big goal is to share all of that with you all. So like I say, unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. I'm just trying to do this new thing called being on time. If I started late, that was a little technical difficulty, but we're going to end on time just because I know it's late where a lot of you all are. But I really want to thank Lawrence, especially when he's had a long day and not feeling his best. You would never know that, huh? So I don't know, we can do like this quiet, like hand clapping, woo, Lawrence, for his time. And personally, I just get charged up every time I interact with Lawrence. People who've done the courses with us before, it's really cool how, like, literally we'll pull up the same quotes from the same person, and he's doing one slideshow in the morning, I have one slideshow in the afternoon, and we're like, oh my God, it's so cool. And I get just, you know, everyone's got these people that just bring out the best in them and light them up. And Lawrence is one of those people. And I hope that you all feel the same after hearing his wisdom. And again, Lawrence, can you do a couple of quick things? Just can you summarize I started off summarizing the two kind of takeaways in my language, but can you just summarize them for us?
Sure, yeah. I was good. You know, I think the main point I want to leave with you guys is that you can actually do a lot more about your hormones through lifestyle, through active changes in what you do in your life, right? So everything we're talking about is this, it's the environment and what's interaction with the body, right? So the body is so much more complex and it can balance itself out if you address the right things, right? So again, it's really a point of empowerment. It's like, okay, if my hormones are off, you know, there must be something wrong and I need to take a hormone or I need to take a medication. That might be true in some cases, but the main point is you can actually rebalance a lot of stuff. You can rebalance a lot of stuff with lifestyle, stress reduction, mind-body practices. And when you allow it to be balanced out and allow the time, a lot of things self-correct, actually, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, yoga is the art of getting out of your own way. And sometimes I feel like our big, busy brain, I mean, I wish we had more time to talk about how our thoughts actually affect our hormones and emotions. But we can leave it at that. But I thought we could maybe do a quick 2-minute breathing thing before we go, just to leave you again with actionable tools. And again, you know, it blows me away when Lawrence was talking about the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary axis that goes down into your adrenals, that if you study the thermostat of the body, you know, the hypothalamus and the pituitary that really send so many signals down, they call it the command center, right? If you study this in school. And it's so cool that the yogis, when we talked about the third eye, the Ajna chakra up here, third eye, actually means command center, like exactly the same words, just Sanskrit or not, right? Like that it's our command center. So something I do almost every morning, I love to share with you, is called the brain hammock. Literally, it's like in around the temporal lobe, like right here, just letting my eyes and my brain sink down. And, you know, I don't want to get too sciencey. I just want you to feel it more than anything. But I just honestly feel that then again, down here in the third chakra where the adrenals are, it just really helps everything to regulate. So let's just try 2 minutes before we go. Close your eyes, get tall. Breathe out. Let your hips go down. Feel the crown lengthening up as you breathe in. And make your breath slow, shifting again into a more calm, centered state of being. Let's breathe out together. Empty your lungs. Breathe out. Breathe in and expand your side ribs. And when you breathe out, just above the soft palate, breathe out. Let the kind of brain sink down, the eyes sink down as the crown rises. And open your mouth a little so your throat can soften. This is called breath enjoyment. Just enjoy every long, slow, deep breath as it comes in. And as it comes out. And we'll just do 2 more long breaths to finish up. So enjoy each one, filling up the belly and the side ribs. One more time, just eyes relaxed, belly soft. Last breath. Okay. Muchas gracias, everybody. That was about 3 minutes, I think, but I just really feel that's a beautiful tool just to really check in with this area, which again, the yogis really pinpoint it for us. But again, if you go straight back from the nose, in between the ears, and just really let that area sink down. We talk about the amygdala, all these things, but I just think that something happens there. The yogis pointed this out, and just the more you could just kind of sink that area down, that something beautiful really happens. And again, in Blissology, we call it the brain hammock. So truly, honestly, thank you for your time. And I hope that you feel you have gained skills and wisdom, and that will help you not only regulate your body, but help you be a better service to your families, your community, and better stewards of nature. All right. Thank you again, Lawrence. Peace,
Awesome.
everybody.
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, it's been a joy. I'm so stoked to see you in Victoria very soon in July. All right. Much love, everybody. Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha.